because what I have gotten back are 2 letters from them and basically reciting the company line. He has taken the position that the FDA is purely adequate to make these determinations, and if they determine there's a significant or material difference between the genetically modified foods and other foods, then they'll require labeling. But we already know the FDA has said there is no difference. So it's a ruse. American Medical Association has kind of straddled the fence. They've said don't necessarily have to label things, but right now there's a voluntary system in place that they think should be mandatory, a mandatory pre-market safety assessment. There's no mandatory assessment of any kind right now, except totally voluntary. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine, which is also medical doctors, have taken a different position. This is a subgroup of the medical field. They've said animal studies indicate serious health risks, including infertility, immune dysregulation, accelerated aging, dysregulation of genes, insulin regulation, signaling of cells, proteins, problems in liver, kidney, spleen, and gastrointestinal systems. So they're convinced that we're doing bad things to ourselves. Before closing up here, I have to give you the last word about fish. FDA is right on the verge of approving genetically modified salmon. It's been in the works for 10 years, and it's a company that proposes to produce salmon eggs in Canada, have those eggs flown to Panama, where they will be grown out and then put onto the market. Here you can see a genetically modified salmon and a farm salmon or cage salmon that currently exists. You can see the difference in size in the same period of time. So we go from a 2.8 pound fish to a 6.6 pound fish that's been genetically modified. Serious issues in the environment. If these fish get into the wild population of salmon, they have breeding advantage, and this transgene will wind up in a study produced out of Purdue that in about 40 generations the wild type will be wiped out. There was a question about nutrition, and you know they're claiming that there was no difference in the 2 salmon, the farm-raised salmon and the genetically modified salmon. I don't think you can read this back there because it's too small a type. So let me hit on a couple of differences. Total fat now, almost 60% increase in total fat, but there was a 65% decrease in omega-3 fats. Protein, negative 5% in protein. Sodium, negative 9%. Vitamin C, negative 25%. Folic acid, negative 12. Calcium, negative 8. Zinc, negative 2. Thiamine, negative 13. I said folic acid. Essential amino acids are all down as well. So you tell me that there's no significant difference between the 2 fish. Genetically modified wheat. There's been a case of genetically modified wheat found in Oregon. There is no approved genetically modified wheat on the market. This was apparently from some test wheat. Subsequently, they found that there have been many pounds of this genetically modified wheat seed stored in a location in Chicago. Now, how it got to Oregon, nobody knows, but even this scare caused a lot of the Asian market to stop the shipment of American wheat to them. They banned it. And the wheat industry simply does not want this at all. So how do we stop it? We buy organic. We buy foods that are labeled with this non-GMO product label. You see that? You see it all over this store, or organic foods. That's it. Don't buy them. I had to put this up here because these were my two primary research animals when I was at Purdue. One is a sturgeon. I love sturgeon. They're an incredible animal. We've almost wiped out several species of those. They live to well over 100 years if they're left alone. They do not come to sexual maturity for 20 years or so, and they're just an amazing, I would say, antique from the past. And then this little guy here is what is called a Daphnia. This is used in a lot of what they're called bioassays, where they test chemicals and so on and how it affects the Daphnia, which live in water. If you've gone swimming in a lake and gulped in a swallow of water, you've probably taken in, oh, let's say a few dozen, maybe 100 or more of these in, and they just add a little protein to your system. They're wonderful little creatures as well.
Thank you.
Did you go to the slide just before this?
Yes. Okay? Bioorganic. Organic is not genetically modified, and the non-GMO label, that's a very reliable label. So if you see that on something or on a shelf, then you can rely on that as well, and just avoid things. Now, read labels, for goodness sakes. If you go into a store, particularly the middle aisles of the store, start reading labels. You're going to find corn syrup. You're going to find soybean oil, canola oil. You're going to find almost everything's got something like that in there. High fructose corn syrups and everything. Right? Yeah.
Is the organic food in like the supermarkets trustworthy? Would you say?
Well, there are tight regulations, so that if it is labeled certified organic, it better be certified organic, because otherwise they're in complete violation of the law. And for some farmer to be able to sell food that is certified organic, they have to follow some very, very strict practices. Bob can probably speak more to that, but I mean, everything in here is that.
Oh, yeah. No, I was saying because somebody I came across, somebody had research on the FDA saying foods were organic approved in supermarkets, but then they found out there was no research, nothing done on them at all. And
well, there are some funny labels going on. I think natural is one, and I don't know what others are, but there are some that they're kind of trying to get around the law and fool you. Yeah.
Aren't they changing labels now?
The what?
The new law is changing labels. I think they're changing them.
Well,
It's supposed to be updated right now.
This
year, the food labels.
Food labels?
Food labels.
Yeah, but they're not requiring genetically modified
No,
to put
no,
on
no,
there, right?
no, absolutely not.
Okay, see.
No,
Yeah.
no. It's just to be updated, scientifically more updated for the food labels, but that doesn't mean that they have to say genetically modified.
See, and the argument in this country has been, oh, we can't do that because all of our stuff is intermingled and, it's too tough to keep it separate and to cause all kind of problems. Besides, we don't want to put it on there because it's going to scare the consumer. They'll think something's wrong with it and so on and so on. Well, I'm thinking, okay, in Europe, for some reason, they don't have any trouble separating things over there, and things that are labeled, and so we can't do it. I don't buy it.
No. Usually, when I go to the grocery store, and I like irritating, I guess, the managers, and I'll ask them, show me in your store what's genetically modified and what's not. I said, I don't want the genetically modified. I will only buy the non-genetically modified, so show me in here what I can buy. And they usually can't do it. But their eyes go, ooh, maybe we better start looking at this. So if we just ask, that puts a big pressure on them.
You're right. I think the more noise that people can make, the more likely some change is going to occur.
Do you have any information on the Monsanto Protection Act?
Let's see. What I forget that. Well, that was passed, and then it was rescinded.
They
That-
said something about that.
You remember that, Bob? Because it was,
It was passed and it was repealed.
yeah. But I forget what it,
They'll try and pass it
Is
again.
that under Obama or was it before that? Was it during the Obama administration too?
yes, this was all under current administration. But it did pass, but the people got so upset that they rescinded it. But you're right, I mean, you're right. The more noise, the more visibility, the more expression that gets out there that we want to know what we're eating, we want to know what we're buying. The more that happens, the more likely the labels are going to occur.
I don't know if I'm under the misconception or not, but I'm pretty sure that I saw something about there being an area between here and Indy that they were doing some testing in the fields with crops.
You are correct. The question was, she thought that between here and Indianapolis, there may have been some test plots on corn. I think you don't have to go any further than Tipton County. This past year, if I drove by down the highway, Tipton County, and you could see there's a big soybean field, and then right in the middle of that soybean field is a defined plot of corn. And that most likely was a test plot for some kind of a corn modification.
How does that, how can that not contaminate the surrounding?
Corn?
Yeah.
It might. Question is how did that, I don't think about it here, but how can that not possibly contaminate things that are around it? It possibly can. And that's one of the big arguments. Organic farmers complain a lot about cross-contamination between crops. And you know, the weird thing about it is that the organic farmer is the one that's required to generate a buffer zone between him or herself and the guy that's growing the other stuff. I don't quite get it, but corn pollinates corn. Let's face it, and the transgene, the corn pollen does travel. Not so much in soybeans, but corn does travel. Yeah.
Well, have you, and I don't know how much it was bogus, but I had read some things about Monsanto purposely contaminating crops because their stuff is trademarked or copyrighted or whatever. So technically they own the crop, and if they somehow accidentally contaminate a farmer's field, then his crop becomes basically their property and they're not allowed, how is it, to replant seeds?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The question was, if you get contamination, there have been many cases where a farmer does not want genetically modified corn or soybeans or canola or whatever it is, and there's been contamination from a Monsanto crop. The prime case for it was in Canada, where there was a canola farmer up there that didn't want GM canola. His neighbor did have GM canola, cross-contaminated. It was found that there was genetically modified canola on this guy's farm as well. How they found out, they don't know. They think somebody came on, trespassed to get the samples. But the crazy thing about it, as far as I'm concerned, is this was taken all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court. The Canadian Supreme Court decided that this canola, patented canola, even though it's on a field that the guy didn't want it, he still had to pay royalties to Monsanto because it was on his field.
And I heard they're trying to patent pigs.
Oh yeah. Well, you don't know it, but there's many genes in you that have already been patented.
They own us too now?
Yes. Yeah.
I have another question. Isn't canola per se already genetically modified? Because it's originally canola is rapeseed.
Yes.
Rapeseed oil. Now, canola is actually a word for Canadian produced rapeseed. So this is where my
I don't know the
comes
answer to
about.
that.
I can touch on that a little bit, I think. Canola is produced, it's a non-conventional hybrid, and they did it through irradiation.
Okay, but
Okay.
And there's a term for that, and it's
Well, it's a radiated mutation. is what it
It's a
is.
mutagenic, is what
Yeah.
they call it. Thank you for using the word mutation, because it's a mutagenic.
yeah, but that's not really something we want either.
Well,
is
don't,
it?
well, see, here's the thing, that's not covered under the organic labeling laws.
Yeah, no,
But
yeah, I know,
it is
but
the result of a chemical or radiation mutation.
I think that's kind of risky as well,
well,
but
that's
see,
what I
after,
mean.
after the development of atomic energy or the atomic bomb, after World War II, there were all sorts of tests done where they literally would put a radioactive source out in the middle of a field, and then they would plant stuff all around it, and it would be subject to radiation, or they would, that was one way, and they'd do it other
Right.
ways as well, and then they would see just, was there anything that came out of that? It was totally at random. Was there anything that resulted that they kind of wanted to keep? But it was, there was nothing directed about it. It was, can we create by radiation some mutation that might be beneficial? And you're right, there are some crops that have resulted from that, but that's not regulated as far as I know in any way.
No, me neither, and that's my thought, because the rapeseed oil originally from Europe is a great oil because it has a wonderful ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids, so
Okay.
something we really would like to have. But as I said, I always look for imported rapeseed oil because I knew it was imported from Europe where we don't have genetically modified. But here, even looking at an organic canola oil, I'm getting a little bit worried. You know what I'm saying?
I think you're right, honestly.
So,
I didn't even know, there's rapeseed, not grapeseed, right?
No, yes,
R-A-P-E,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
it's rapeseed. It's called rapeseed.
Rape,
R-A-P-E.
yeah,
R-A-P-E.
Yeah.
yes,
Seed is
yes.
different. And there's also grapes.
And I'm not talking about grapeseed oil, I'm talking about rapeseed oil, which often, if you really translate the word rapeseed oil, it often comes out as canola.
As canola.
But as I said, canola is actually, or as Bob explained, it's actually mutated.
Now, there
So,
were radiation can be good
however-
for us.
No. Well, I mean, the same thing can happen, if you get too much radiation, you can get cancer, right? Because it causes changes in our DNA. It screws up the DNA. Something gets messed with. It's like nature has had a way of doing things pretty well. Now, I don't have a problem with traditional breeding schemes where they've tried to create hybrids and that sort of thing. If something will go through a sexual reproductive process, you've not blasted your way through established biological barriers. If you go to genetic modification where you're either by hypodermic needle or a gene gun or a virus or something moving things around that have never before happened in nature, we are actually creating organisms that have never existed before on the planet. And we're playing with fire because it's like we don't know what the outcome may be. And there was a statistician that just recently had an article that said even if there's an incidence of 0.01% where there's some damage occurs, if you repeat that over and over and over, and we've got thousands of tests going on right now, if you repeat that over and over and over and over, at some point it becomes certainty that you're going to have an adverse outcome. And his prediction, being a statistician, is that if we keep going the way we're going, we're going to create something that may potentially wipe out the biome.
Really?
It's serious.
That's what things I've been seeing seems like it's affecting reproduction.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is serious. So,